warm and friendly hello. Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Cups Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peters, and now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. We've got an excellent podcast for you as we're going to be joined in segment number 2 by one of our good friends, Robbie Lastella. He's doing such great work over at Bracketeer.org, looking at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. Does a great job locked in on the Florida Atlantic Owls and so much more. And we're going to chat it up with him about what we all saw in the NBA draft decisions, where our good friend Milan Mimicevic might be ending up, a few teams that under the radar have been able to do a nice job here in the offseason that have added some guys over the last few weeks, because obviously the NBA draft decisions at LSU have been getting all the headlines. So we want to highlight some of these guys that maybe have slipped through the cracks, maybe a few guys that are going to be able to make an impact that we're not talking about right now. And I'm going to highlight with him the fact that we have seen a nice offseason here from the Big East as well. And then in the final segment, I'm going to give you guys a recap of the news and notes we saw in college basketball on Saturday. If you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one or two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @GUnit_81. Keep in mind, letters CM, they mean does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. The other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And I do beg with you, I do plead with you, please do send in these Twitter/X questions. But one thing that I want to highlight here in the introduction is the fact that now that a lot of these guys have been picked off in terms of the transfer portal, and now we've got a lot of these guys signed, you're going to be seeing some of these teams that maybe have struck out on transfers looking to the international ranks to be able to bring in guys. And we saw this from North Carolina on Saturday. Alexandros Samardov, hopefully I got that correct. He's a true 7-footer. He's 21 years old. He was playing over in Greece for Panthakos. I think that there's a few of those teams. He was a little bit more of a reserve for them, but still was able to give them this past year like 4 points per contest. A guy that's able to stretch a floor, pop it a little bit from 3-point range. He signs with North Carolina, and we can expect to see more and more of these. We have seen this quite a bit in the last few seasons. You are going to have some guys that reclassify as well. So some of these guys that maybe were originally going to be for the class of 2027, they move up to the class of 2026 out of necessity. You've got a lot of these power conference teams that they only have like 1 or 2 roster spots remaining. For the mid-major teams, it's especially important for them to be able to try to find a few guys. And obviously a team like looking at you, Kentucky, especially if they don't get in on the Milan sweepstakes, they're probably going to need to get an international guy or two. They're probably going to need to have perhaps a guy or two reclassify. Those are the things that I'm going to be taking a look at right now. And as we are getting very, very close to having these rosters solidified, I mentioned this on the podcast yesterday, and will once again here, those conference previews I do every single year on this podcast, probably going to be starting up within the next 2 or so weeks. So be on the lookout there, and every single day I try to give you guys great interviews like the one that we'll have next with our good friend Robbie Lastella right here on Cusco Soups with myself, Greg Hoops Peters, and now a part of the VSiN family of podcasts. Side edge this college basketball season? Well, VSiN experts use CBB Analytics, the most comprehensive college basketball analytics platform in the world. See injury impact, on and off data, clutch time performance metrics, first versus second half splits, and so much more. Utilize the promo code of VSiN, that is VSIN, to get $30 off and find your betting edge over at cbbanalytics.com. That is cbbanalytics, all one word.com. For anyone that is new to VSiN, well, I wish you a friendly hello. This is an attention to anyone that is new to VSiN because you're able to get some free stuff with our daily newsletter. It's a great way to catch up on everything that's happening in the sports betting world. It's delivered straight to your inbox every single morning. VSiN's newsletter offers picks, data, strategies for the day's betting menu, and so much more. Sign up for free today over at VSiN.com/newsletter. That's VSIN.com/newsletter, and start receiving your free newsletter tomorrow morning. That is VSIN.com/newsletter. Stay ahead of the game and bet smarter with VSiN. And we're back here lovely Las Vegas for Cups Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peters, and now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. Always great to be joined by this man, as we've got Robbie Lastella aboard. He's doing such great work over at the website of our guy, Rocco Miller, Bracketeer.org, as he's doing a great job all 12 months out of the year looking at this great game of college basketball. Additionally, I know it's getting to be football season. He does a little bit of work taking a look at things with the New York Giants. He does a great job following all things Florida Atlantic, as he is out there in the great state of Florida over at FSU. FAU Owl's Nest, and so much more. You're able to follow him on the old Twitter /X at the letter R, last name Lastella, Lastella, and then the word report all together. And Robbie, always appreciate it, my friend. Thank you so much.
Oh, of course, Greg. Thanks for having me. It's almost NBA draft time, which is exciting. Now we know for sure who's in, who's out. That's a big one, and I think we saw some fun returnees back to college as well.
Absolutely. And let's dive in on it. Just in your opinion, was there one or two big surprises out there? Because I thought for me, Malik Thomas, I thought he had a great opportunity to return to Arkansas. We did see the fact that Arkansas was able to get one of their guys back in Billy Richmond. I really thought that they could have benefited from getting both of those guys back. And Malik Thomas was really the one guy that stayed in the NBA draft. That was a little bit of a surprise to me.
Yeah, like we talked about the last time, it's going to depend on what team he goes to where that'll end up being a good decision or not. He needs to go to a team where he's going to get developed. And, if he does, I think it can work out to be a great decision. I think sometimes everything's so focused on money. He obviously would have made probably a lot more returning to college. But if he can get put in a situation where he can learn behind a veteran, I've seen some mocks to Minnesota, learning from Mike Conley, first of all. He's a veteran of all veterans. He'd be a good guy to learn from. But you got Ant there as well, and a whole bunch of talent on that Timberwolves team. So I like a landing spot like that. But we'll see, honestly. For me, with him, it definitely will depend on where he goes. I think a good choice in staying definitely went to Alan Graves. Well, we'll get into the guys who decided to stay a little bit more, but Graves deciding to stay in the draft, I think that's big because we talked about that last time. It could have gone either way with him. He could have gone back to college, but there was a rumor he would have gone to LSU, and I don't know necessarily how much he would have fit in at LSU. So him staying in the draft is definitely a good one as well. But I agree with you. Malik Thomas staying is definitely is relatively big. I think Koa Pete as well. Arizona could have gone back to Arizona, and Arizona's really trying to get back to a Final Four next year. They've got a lot of momentum going on, and so him going back could have been something to seal the deal and really put them in a position to be that top contender right away. But I still think Arizona gets there, and I think Pete, I'm seeing some projections as well, 24 to 27 range. If he goes all the way down at 27 and goes with Boston, I think that'd be a fun fit. There's a lot of talent, obviously, on that Celtics team. Koa Pete, Jason Tatum, I think those two would be fun to see together for sure. But, I think we saw definitely a mix of guys considering the money aspect of it and going back to college, but we also saw a lot of guys bet on their potential and go to the NBA. So I just think, that's very important. A lot of people are doom and gloom and think NIL's ruining everything. But I think, looking at some of the guys that we got back in college, I don't know necessarily we would have got that without it. So I think it's a good mix. Some surprises, though, for sure.
Yep, absolutely. I'm right there with you. And I think that the most intriguing name in terms of him coming back, and I did feel like he was one of the best guys that did come back as well, Milan Misalovic, because we all recall what he did over at Iowa State. And unlike a lot of the guys that they were either going to be going back to their respective schools, like we saw that for Tanner Thomas. We were talking about Malik Thomas. He was either going to go back to Arkansas or he was going to stay in the draft. Milan is now out there in the transfer portal. And just how do you take a look at the sweepstakes for him? Because he's pretty much the lone big fish that is out there right now. Everyone else has signed with another school. And there have been a few teams that have struck out in the transfer portal that they've got a lot of money and they've got one chance to try to be able to bring in there a big player.
Yeah, definitely. I think he's a guy that's obviously going to be a game changer wherever he goes. I think early on, St. John's would have been my pick, but then they go and get Yesifo. So, I don't think necessarily they're going to be the favorite unless he's, not going for the top dollar amount, which could be the case, and then they're back into play. But to me, with that, I think Kentucky's definitely got to make a push. They got Moreno to come back, which is nice, but there's still work to be done, and a move like Milosavljevic could definitely seal the deal for Kentucky to be, I don't know necessarily how much of where they fall in terms of the contender, but that'll put them in a better position than they're at right now. There are some light ones that you definitely could have looked at, potentially. Amari Allen returning is a big one, but I think with Momcilovic specifically, I think that's going to be the biggest sweepstakes you get from this draft. SFO is a quick commit to St. John's. There's some others too, but I think getting this amount of talent back, looking at it, you go Stojakovic back, Tyler Tanner coming back, Yesifo coming back, Billy Richmond coming back, Moreno coming back, Momcilovic coming back, Jeremy Fears coming back. These are all guys, in my opinion, Badunga, all these guys, Abel, these are guys that before NIL probably would have stayed in the NBA, even on a second round tag. But now, they're going to be making money that they may never have a chance to make in the NBA. So definitely intrigued on the balance of talent both in the draft and out of the draft. I think NIL, this is the most positive aspect of it, is it's led to a balance in both sides. Now, at least that's the case for this year. Next year's draft, not looking so hot. If you're in the NBA, I definitely would consider trading your picks, but I don't do NBA. So if you're an NBA fan, I definitely would, pray your team trades their picks for next year.
Well, you came to the right podcast because this is Coast to Coast Hoops for all college basketball teams, a little bit less for the NBA, as Robbie Lastella does such great work out there for FAU Owls Nest, Bracketeer.org, and so much more. He's joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, and out of all the teams that did get back their guys, which one do you think benefited the most? Because I just still look at those two SEC teams at Alabama and Vanderbilt. I thought that they were going to be fine if they didn't get Amari Allen and Tanner Thomas back respectively, but I did feel like those two guys coming back keeps them more towards, shall we say, the upper half of the SEC rather than the middle half, because we know that Tennessee has made so many moves. Florida, they're going to be so locked and loaded for this upcoming season, and with all the spending out there in the SEC, I really felt like they needed to get those two guys back, and those two returns, I think just in terms of their respective teams, were some of the biggest ones on the board.
Yeah, I think definitely Allen returning is big for Alabama. That gives Nate Oates a piece to build around. He likes to do that. Matt Abel going to North Carolina, I wouldn't give that a team win, but that's definitely an individual kind of move for them that I think will definitely yield positive. I want to see where Momcilovic lands, because if he goes to Kentucky, I think him and Moreno definitely puts them into that tier. And then it's definitely all SEC teams from that point in this category, because Arkansas with Billy Richmond, even though they lose Malik Thomas, they get him back. Tyler Tanner returning to Vanderbilt is big. I definitely agree with you there. I don't know necessarily how much of an opportunity he would have really got to develop, and he probably would have been sent to the G League most likely. So this allows him to get the ball in his hands, and really he could be a difference maker for them. So definitely I'd say Vanderbilt with that move right now. It definitely varies to change. St. John's, though, Yesifo going there, they can land Momcilovic. All of a sudden, Rick Pitino's building something serious. So I'm keeping my eye on St. John's to see what they can do. If they can do that, all of a sudden, the Big East becomes, they're always appointment TV, but next year especially, I think this is a big year for Rick. He's only getting older, so each year he's going to keep reloading and trying to get the best team possible. So I wouldn't put them out of the market for Momcilovic just from that perspective. And if they can get him and Yesifo, all of a sudden St. John's is really, really something special for next year.
Oh, and I'm right there with you. And even though there weren't really a lot of NBA draft decisions regarding Big East teams specifically, because Tonde Yusufu, he was originally over at Baylor, and then he just had his pick of the litter there. So it was a case where maybe one or two guys would go via the transfer portal. They weren't really going to lose a lot of their own, but I've just been really impressed by the offseason in general with regards to the Big East, because you mentioned it, for St. John's, a little bit slow going. They needed that big piece. They get it with Yusufu over the last few days. Obviously, UConn, they're doing all that they can to stay at top of the conference, but even a team like a DePaul is spending. Georgetown, here late in the process, bringing in Victorious Miller over the last week or two. I felt like they needed a piece. They got it. Providence, Xavier, they've been two teams I've been impressed by. Marquette actually learned that they could utilize the transfer portal. I think just across the board, the Big East has had an incredible offseason, and after it was so top-heavy last season, I think there's going to be a lot more balance and a lot more bids for this conference this upcoming season in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, definitely. That's always the goal. They're going through a commissioner change. I think Dan Gavitt will probably get it, in my opinion. And I think the focus of the conference is to get it back to a position where, they're getting 3-4 bids. It's been down over the last couple years. And, UConn's done a lot of the heavy lifting. St. John's, once Pitino got there, they've obviously been up there as well. But outside of those two, it's been a little inconsistent. We saw Georgetown make a little bit of noise. We've seen them make noise in the transfer portal. I think Providence is a team to watch. I think Hodgson goes in there with a lot of talent on his team and a chip on his shoulder trying to win right away. So, he did that at USF, and I think he can go right in there and do it again in the Big East. So there is a ton of potential with the Big East this season. They need to not cannibalize each other, because at the end of the day, there'll still be some struggles at the bottom. I don't know necessarily how good Butler will be year one of their new regime, DePaul as well. But that's the thing about the Big East, is they're sneaky, and then all of a sudden you lose those games, and then that puts them in a position where they're struggling to get the amount of bids that, they want. So can't cannibalize yourself, but I think this year we see the Big East get back to, I don't know if they get 5, but I think 3-4 bids for the Big East, maybe 5, is definite strong potential for this upcoming season.
Yep, and with the field expanding to 76 teams as well, you have to feel like the Big East if they were having one or two of those teams on the bubble, that probably is going to be a big benefit to them as well. And I know that a lot of hoopla over the last few weeks has been around the NBA draft decisions, and obviously it's been around LSU as well. And we aired that out on the podcast last time around. Still not pleased about it, but we will let that be where it is because I want to highlight some of the teams that maybe aren't getting the love that they deserve. Is there been a team or two over the last few weeks that maybe wasn't a part of NBA draft decisions and wasn't named LSU that you like what they were doing? Because I mentioned it with Georgetown bringing in Victorious Miller. I thought that was a nice under the radar ad for them, and I feel like there have been a lot of mid-major teams here in the month of May that have done a good job being able to pick up some of those guys that, for lack of a better term, fell through the cracks.
Just mentioned Georgetown. We talked about them last time. They're still my team right now. I like them to potentially, be a single-digit seed in the NCAA tournament, as crazy as it sounds this year. I'm not saying, a 5 seed, but I could see them being a sneaky 8, 9 seed, get, 10, 11 wins in Big East play. All of a sudden, like you mentioned, that expanded tournament's their friend, and they could climb to be a 9 seed. The roster's building out. Jalon Lowe, L. Marco Jackson, Josiah Parker, who I saw firsthand a lot at FAU. I think he's going to slide into the Big East and be, really good there. And Victorious Miller, you mentioned him. That's just a late edition ad that he could be arguably one of their best players. They're going to need Shol Machat. Sorry if I butchered that name, but he's going to need to develop as well. But they've got a lot of potential. I see them making the NCAA tournament, and with the right button pushing, like I said, they could be a single-digit seed.
Yep, I'm right there with you. I felt like they need that piece or two. Picking up Miller over the last few days is exactly what the doctor ordered there. I continue to be impressed by DePaul. I know that we were mentioning them a little bit in passing, and I don't know if they get back to the NCAA tournament or anything like that, but considering they have been an absolute doormat for about 2 decades, it's very nice to see them picking up someone like a Mugun Gwath and showing that they still have a pulse and they actually care about basketball. So that's very good for the Big East, and a man that definitely cares about college basketball, a man that does such a great job following the sport all 12 months of the year is you, Robbie. I know you got your finger on the pulse of a little bit of everything. You're doing a great job on all fronts with Florida Atlantic, and I know you guys over there at Bracketeer.org are very hard at work with the schedules that are coming out in the coming days and coming weeks, so love the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Absolutely. Keep up with Rocco's schedule posting on Bracketeer.org. You'll hear it first there. Things are very, very secretive in the schedule world, but Rocco gets a lot of that information, and as soon as he's able to give that to you in the public, he does. And so definitely check that out at Bracketeer.org and on his personal socials, Rocco Miller 8. For me personally, you can give me a follow on X, R Lastella Report. I appreciate the support for Bracketeer. We're not the biggest team in the world, but we love college basketball and try to put out the best stuff we can. So
absolutely. And the team that you got over there at Bracketeer.org, one of the hardest working teams out there. And that's what we love on this podcast. You don't need to have the biggest team. You don't need to have the $20 million NIL budget. We love workers here. Robbie is one of them. Obviously, Rocco is as well. And just going for a little bit of a second here with regards to scheduling, he always mentions this when he's on the podcast as well. If you go on Bracketeer.org, there are some little Easter eggs in there that if you search hard enough, you're going to be able to find them as well. So that's a big reason why you want to go over to there to the website. If you like what you see, they've got a support button for you guys. Throw in there a few bucks, and that keeps those guys going. Robbie, Avetta, along with Rocco, they're doing such great work, and always great to be able to get them aboard on this podcast. So big thanks to Robbie for joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the Beats and Family Podcast. Up next, I give you guys a recap of the news and notes that we saw in college basketball on Saturday. Here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peters, and now part of the Beats and Family Podcast. Always great to be joined by Robbie Lastella. He does such great work over at Bracketeer.org, looking at this great game of college basketball. Every single time he joins me, he lends such great insights. Did so once again today. So a big thanks to Robbie for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you a recap of the news and notes that we saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours. Northern Illinois, low-key, has had a pretty solid offseason. It's been very, very rough for them the last few seasons, but they get another one up on the board. Zot, the former UC Irvine Anteater, signs with them as hopefully I get this name correct, Akiva McBrainy Griffin is signing with them. He was a little bit more of a reserve at 6'9", 2.5 points, 2 rebounds per game. Seems like he could be a relatively solid shot blocker, and for this Northern Illinois team, they have been very bad in the post ever since they lost a very dominant big man in Jan and Conan Niederhauser a few seasons ago. But I really like what they've done. They've won a little bit West Coast. So Zai Butin, who was over at South Dakota, is coming in. He's a nice, capable scorer. David Douglas, he was a nice three-point shooter over at Fresno State and UW Green Bay over the last few seasons. Jack Daughtry has some nice versatility coming over from Illinois State. Michaelis Ivanauskis at 6'8" is able to hit the boards along Tolu Samuels for Northern Illinois. They've got some good balance. I don't know if they're going to be back towards the top of the MAC or anything like that. I think that would be a little bit far-fetched, but certainly much more respectable than they've been over the last few seasons. So I like this for them. I like this one as well. As you've got Jamie Kadametti, hopefully I got that correct. He was over at NC State. He's a gentleman from Finland who redshirted this last season. He has decided that he is going to be joining the Men of Troy. He used to be playing for Drive Academy Espoo, a under 20-year-old European youth league. So he's got a little bit of international experience. And for Troy, obviously they're picking up the pieces. You lose Scott Cross in the offseason, and that's just a big giant issue for you in general. And for Troy, it was a little bit slow going here in the transfer portal. But that said, it does feel like they're getting things rolling a little bit more, and I do think that they made the best of a bad situation. They signed Adam Howard as their coach, as he was a guy that was an assistant for Troy way back in the day. He was over at NC State for a little bit of time as well, so that's why you've got a little bit of the NC State connections as well. I don't think that he's trying out some of the things that Will Wade is right now, but that said, bringing in someone with some international experience, a guy that feels like is going to be able to stretch the floor, I do like this for Troy, and wouldn't doubt it if they're looking to play very up-tempo, as they also bring in Caden Diggins, who was over at UMBC, and Robert Davis. He was a guy that averaged like 15 points per game a few seasons ago over at Old Dominion, so a few relatively nice adds there. You've got Afari Navai. He was over at Oral Roberts this last season, 11 points, 6 boards, a little bit over a steal per contest. Began his career over at West Virginia, where he really didn't see a lot of run. He has decided that he's going to be heading on over to Middle Tennessee, and for Middle Tennessee, been a little bit slow going here in the portal, and for Middle Tennessee, they just really have abandoned the fact that a few years ago, when things were really rocking and rolling for them, they were able to do a good job in terms of generating turnovers. That has been really lost for them over the last few seasons, so it feels like they're going to be trying to be able to get back to that just a little bit more. And for Middle Tennessee, they've also got Kevin Dekovovich, who was over at North Alabama, 10-point per game scorer for them. Eli Rice didn't see a lot of run over at Penn State, but he should be able to help them out as well. They've got some good versatility, guys with active hands, so it feels like they're getting back to their roots. I really like this. Nice to see them being able to bring in some guys that I think are going to be really good in the system. Ben Tweedy, he was over at Colgate this last season, and he has decided that he is heading on over to Manhattan. Began his career over at UW Green Bay, and he was averaging about 9.5 points, 2.5 assists per game. Shot 38.5% from three-point range. Really good ad for a Manhattan team that last year they just didn't have the year that they were expecting when they had Will Sidner become ineligible. That really had things toilet bowl for them, and for Manhattan, they just really need to restore a little bit of defense. Tweedy, I think, is going to be able to have some active hands. They also bring in Josiah Sabino, who was a nice scorer over at Niagara last season. Kevin Kearney is a guy that is a 6'7", nice rebounder that comes over from St. Joseph's as well. For Manhattan, defense should be much better this season. Obviously, the offense might be taking a little bit of a drop-off with losing a lot of those guys from a season ago, but I do like the moves that these guys are making, and I love this one for Alabama State. Paul McMillan, he was out all of last season due to some personal issues. I believe that he had like a death in the family. He was dealing with some injuries, so he was dealing with a little bit of everything. He, 2 seasons ago, though, over at Canisius, was a 20-point per game scorer. Like, I thought that he was going to go to Grambling and absolutely tear it up in the SWAC. He's staying in the SWAC. He heads on over to Alabama State, and for Alabama State, they have really been able to put it together here over the last few days, along with a lot of these SWAC schools. They're going to not necessarily get their pick of the litter. It's the guys that fall through the cracks that they usually sign, but you look at what Alabama State has been able to do. They bring in Amari Brown, a guy that was able to put in there some good numbers over at Southern Indiana, and should be able to give them some active hands. Michael James, he was a top scorer over at Mississippi Valley State. Joseph Scott, Gray Scott, guy that's able to have active hands. He was solid over at Abilene Christian this last season. Isaiah Barngener, he was a guy that was at 6'7", able to provide some rebounding over at Texas State. So I really think that this Alabama State team is really going to be able to find their footing out there, and I think that just overall the SWAC feels like they're going to be better this season. Tony Madlock had a little bit of a down year last year. He had lost his son TJ Madlock, who was a big reason why they made the NCAA NCAA tournament a few seasons ago. He was the main point guard of that team, but it feels like they're going to be back, locked and loaded, and this is a massive, massive add for them if you're able to have McMillan be anywhere close to where he was a few seasons ago. Dylan Williams, he was over at Penn this last season. He has decided that he's going to be heading on over to Northwestern. He was averaging 4.5 points per game in 7 games. He was limited due to injury. This should not be anything that really changes the trajectory of Northwestern. If they're relying upon this gentleman to be providing big-time minutes for them, well, they are going the wrong way down a one-way street for Northwestern. I think that they're going to be back towards the bottom of the Big Ten once again this season for Northwestern. Just feels like they're not necessarily keeping up with the Joneses here in the conference, and they do bring in Ryan Solis as well from Columbia, so they added some depth pieces. I do like the fact that they brought in Alex Kozic, who didn't see a lot of minutes over at BYU, but he has a little bit of upside. Jack Karzinski was a nice scorer over at Bellarmine, but Bellarmine 365 Division I teams, 365th in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. L.A. Pride is coming off of injury from Northeastern. Cullen Smith, nice add. He was over at Vanderbilt to begin his career, but lots of question marks over there at Northwestern, and this is not one that is really moving the needle for them, and this is one that I think might move the needle a little bit more. As let's go back into the SWAC. Davion Williams, he last season was over at Alcorn State, was averaging for that team 1.3 steals, threw in there 8 points per game. A guy that tried to pop it a little bit from three-point range. That wasn't necessarily his forte, but 32.5% three-point shooting, still nothing to scoff at, especially out there in the SWAC. He has decided that he is going to be heading on over to Prairie View, and for Prairie View, this school has always done a great job in terms of generating turnovers. They sort of know what they are. Prairie View typically not like an amazing three-point shooting team, but they're a team that they realize that they're going to get absolutely dump trucked on the glass. They're going to look to be able to win the turnover battle, and they've got a lot of guys that, in my opinion, fit the system. Sebastian Tidor is a 6'5" combo player. He's going to be solid coming over from Portland State. They bring in someone in Jalen Lee, who was over at Texas State, one of the better teams in terms of generating turnovers in all of college basketball. Anthony Gauss from Charleston Southern really doesn't fit the system, but he should be able to give them some explosive scoring. Again, you really don't have a lot of size outside of someone like a Davis Bynum, who at 6'9", he was a solid rebounder over at Ryder, but I feel like Prairie View is putting together a pretty complete roster. I think that this is going to be a really good cog for them, a guy that knows the lay of the land out there in the SWAC. He's able to have active hands, so this is a good one for them. And then David Tubeck, he was over at UTEP this last season, averaged about 3.5 points per game. He began his career over at Seton Hall, just never really got out there on the floor for Seton Hall, but he's decided that he is going to be heading on over to USC Upstate, and with the Coach Richter system, I feel like he's been able to do a relatively okay job over at USC Upstate. We saw them have a nice triumph last season as they went on the road. They were able to knock off Fresno State. That was a nice surprise for a lot of people, and they haven't necessarily had a lot of ads here in the offseason. They're looking to a lot of more Division II guys, but Miles Webb at 6'8" was a main rebounder for Delaware State last season, a Delaware State team that was very good defensively. Zach Johnson, he was over at Central Florida last season. Didn't see a lot of run, but he should be able to help out with regards to a little bit of facilitation, and he should be able to give this team a little bit more offense. They're probably going to be looking at Waku Temza, who is over at Cleveland State, to help run the point as well, and then Alessandro Perotti, who was over at Wofford at 6'10". He gives them a little bit of size, so it feels like USC Upstate looking to go a little bit more balanced. They do lose a lot of that roster from season ago, and out there in the Big South, where we've got a lot of teams like Longwood and obviously High Point spending, I feel like they're falling behind a little bit, but still nice to see them have a pickup like this, and we're looking to pick up on as much college basketball news as humanly possible. If you do like hearing from this fine podcast, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one or two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at GNet_D1. Keep in mind, letters CM, they mean does not matter. So, as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. The other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. Big thanks once again to Robbie Lastella of Bracketeer.org for joining me in the last segment, coming at you guys every single day on this podcast, recapping the news and notes of college basketball here in the offseason once we get back in season, picks and analysis on every single game, every single day. So I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.